Hari Om. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Gurudevo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahabiryankaravavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste friends. Team Param Vedanta welcomes you all for the session 13 of Kathopanishad. We have completed 2 vallis of first chapter. Last session, we have entered into third valli and studied mantras from 1 to 5. Today, we will take up mantras from 6 to 12 of third valli for our study, and they will be explained by Srimati Triveni, Mr. Ullas, Srimati Aruna, Dr. Vasumati, and Srimati Pannaga. Dr. Hegde sir, as always, will give us the deeper thoughts. Now it's time for us to listen to Dr. Anupama, who will briefly revisit the mantras we studied last week before we go for introduction of today's class. Over to you, Dr. Anupama ma'am.
Thank you, madam. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A recap, mantras 1 to 5, Adhyaya 1, Valli 3. Mantra 1 says, Ritam pibantau sukrutasya loke, guham pravishtav parame parardhe, chaya tapau brahma vido vidanti. This is the introduction of Paramatma, the original consciousness, as Atapaha, the light, and Jivatma, the reflected consciousness, as Chaya, the shadow. We know that the mind is endowed with both the original consciousness and the reflected consciousness. Where is this mind located? Loke, in the body. And where are Jivatma and Paramatma located? Guham Pravishtav. They are lodged in the mind, which is in the body. Which aspect of the mind? Parame Parardhe. Para means Paramatma and Ardha means space. So Parardhe means Paramatma Vasasthanam or Brahmasthanam, the sacred space, the sanctum sanctorum. Now, what are Jivatma and Paramatma, Chaya and Atapaha, doing in the Parame Parardhe? Ritam Pibantav. Ritam means karma phalam and Pibantav means consuming. Whose karma phalam? Sukrutasya ritam. Sukrutasya means swayam kritasya, one's own karma. Let us now analyze the word Pibantav. It literally means that both Jivatma and Paramatma are indulging in karma. Is this contradictory to the Akarta Abhokta status of Paramatma? According to the Mundaka mantra Dvasuparna, Tayor Anya Pipilam Swadu Atti, as the lower bird, the Jivatma, indulges in karma, Anashnan Anya Abhichaka Shiti, the higher bird, the Paramatma, remains still. Sakshi Chaitanyam. The erroneous perception of Paramatma being a bhokta of karma phalam is due to its proximity to the Jivatma. The attributes of Jivatma seem to be transferred to Paramatma, which in reality is a karta, abhokta, sakshi chaitanyam. Just as a clear and colorless crystal appears red in the proximity of a red rose. This Jivatma and Paramatma are discussed both in the Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda of the Vedas. The Brahma Vida or Jnani focuses on Jnana Khanda. They focus on Paramatma, the Shreya Marga, whereas the Karmis focus on Karma Kanda, the rituals. Being ritualistic, they're called Panchabnyas and Trinachiketas. They focus on the Jivatma, the Preya Marga. We have the free will to choose. Mantra 2 says that both the Karma Khanda and Jnana Khanda followers have a setu, a bridge as support. Significant in this mantra is the word Shakemahi, which means we have a choice. The Shreya Marga is a bridge to Nirguna Brahma, Param Aksharam Abhayam. The Preya Marga is the bridge to Anitya Sukham. As the Jivatma embarks on this journey, fitness at all levels is mandatory, and hence we have the Ratha Kalpana, mantras 3 and 4. Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi, Shariram Ratham Evatu, Buddhim tu Saratim Vidhi, Manaha Pragraharam Evacha. The prerequisites for an efficient journey are the intellect should be well informed through Shravana Manana Nididhyasana, Guru Shastra Upadesha, both IQ and SQ, the intelligence and spiritual the quotients should be optimized. The mind should be disciplined, become a sadhana chatushtaya sampanna, and have a high EQ, emotional quotient. The sense organs should be well restrained. The destination should be moksha, tasmad bhuya na jayate. Ultimately and absolutely mandatory is the teamwork of these called arjavam. What is arjavam? It is the crafting of our life symphony with intelligence, emotional, and spiritual quotients. The spiritual quotient is the sine qua non of personal and professional success. Remember, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience here, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Yamadharmaraja says, Vijnanavan bhavaha. Although the emotional quotient is strengthened by upasana, samadhi shatka sampatti, by becoming a sadhana chatushtaya sampanna, by gaining jnana yogyata, the emotional quotient is further strengthened. The mind now starts connecting jivatma with paramatma. This is spiritual intelligence. This is value-based life. The chaya, the jivatma, opts now for Shreya Marga if the spiritual quotient is high. Living in harmony with our values and connecting with something larger than our body mind complex enhances this spiritual quotient. For this arjavam, for this symphony, all the four factors, the body, the sense organs, mind, the intellect should be healthy. FIR should be reduced, and study of scriptures is mandatory. Vijnanavan bhavaha. Or else, as Yamadharmaraja says, Yahatu avignavan bhavati ayuktena manasa sada tasya indriyani avashyani dushta ashva eva sarathehe. Meaning, if buddhi cannot guide the mind, if the mind cannot guide the sense organs, what is the result? Cacophony instead of symphony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anupama, for giving us a, a, a brief synopsis of two important mantras we studied in the last class and three mantras which deal with what we are going to study in today's class about the Ratha Kalpana, or the very famous chariot example. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. In today's class, we go into mantras which have more details of the very famous chariot example, or the Ratha Kalpana. Each speaker will give more details about the symbolism. Essentially, our life is compared to a pilgrimage, to a yatra. Our body could be compared to a vehicle which takes us on this spiritual journey. The sense organs can be compared to the horses that drive the chariot. The mind acts like the reins that control the horses. The important person in our journey is the driver who decides our destination. The traveler is ourselves, the Jivatma, who employs a suitable driver to take us in the correct direction. What is very important is whether our body and mind are a fit instrument. Secondly, are we sure about the direction that we want in our life? Am I clear about the various choices that I have to make? All these will be discussed in our class today, which deal with the Rathakalpana. These are wonderful examples. These help us to guide. But every example, we must see they have limitations. In the Mundakopanishad, we had a similar bow and arrow example where the spiritual texts that we study, the Upanishads, are considered to be the bow, the Jivatma is the arrow, and our target is Brahman. And therefore, there is a certain journey to go. That means, just like in the Rathakalpana example, there is a gap between who we are and where we want to go. And then, because there is a journey, there is also a time separation. Now, this becomes a problem because between me and my goal, between Jivatma and Paramatma, there is no time difference, there is no space difference. If at all, the difference is on our own understanding. That means it is a journey from ignorance to knowledge, from tamasoma jyotirgamaya. So an intelligent student will see what is the teacher trying to convey and use the example only to that extent that it is going to help and not extend the example. With this background, let us look into these important verses of the Rathakalpana. Triveni, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Yastu Vijnanavan Bhavati Yuktena Manasa Sada Tasyendriyani Vashyani Sadashva Iva Saratehe. Yahatu Sada Yuktena Manasa Vijnanavan Bhavati Saratehe Sadashvaha Iva Tasya Indriyani Vashyani Bhavanti. Suppose there is one who is with discrimination and always with a disciplined mind, his sense organs will be controllable like the tame horses of the charioteer. Shankara's commentary says, but of him who is a driver, the contrary of one already explained, that is, of the driver who knows and who has the mind always under restraint, the senses standing in the place of the horses can be let go or stopped, that is, controlled like the good horses of the other driver. This verse contrasts the person in the previous verse. He is now describing the vehicle where every factor is fit. This person's intellect is very clear about both his secondary and primary goals of his life. His secondary goals are aligned with the primary goal, which is moksha. The Shastras help one to set and accomplish the intermediate goals while not losing sight of the primary goal. While achieving the intermediate goals, one should introspect whether he is growing internally, that is sadhana chatushtaya sampatti. This is described in verse 2.41 of the Bhagavad Gita. Vyavasayatmika buddhirekeha kurunandana bahushaka hyanandascha buddhyo vyavasinam. That is, O Arjuna, there is only one clear understanding in this field. However, the notions of those without clarity are many branched and endless. As human beings, our intellect possesses the ability to control the mind. Buddhi Yoga is the art of detaching the mind from the fruits of actions by developing a resolute decision of the intellect that all work is meant for the pleasure of God. This resolve becomes so strong in higher stages of sadhana that nothing can deter the sadhaka from treading the path. He or she thinks, even if there are millions of obstacles on my path, even if the whole world condemns me, even if I have to lay down my life, I will still not give up my sadhana. But those whose intellect is many branched find their mind running in various directions. They are unable to develop the focus of mind that is required to tread the path to God. The unintelligent either do not know their destination or forget it. The intelligent ones are focused. Satsanga will help one keep the destination in focus. The intelligent one knows the necessity of the balanced mind. He is careful not to be hijacked by his emotions, that is, raga and dvesha, that can take him away from his path. Through the lifestyle of Karma Yoga, he maintains the equanimity of mind, samatvam, even in the worst crisis. If the mind and intellect are under control, the sense organs will naturally be under his control. He is the master of his sense organs, like the wonderful driver of well tamed horses. In summary, the first requirement for spirituality is to make sure that all the organs and the instruments are in fit condition. One should put forth the effort, but the effort without the cooperative sense organs and the mind is insufficient. In all the Upanishads, we pray to the Lord to help us in our endeavors. Effort plus grace of God is equal to mastery of the organs. It is a compulsory exercise for spiritual goal. Educating and enlightening the mind is important. In the beginning stages of life, one should focus only on education. Therefore, the study of the scriptures is advised as a first sadhana. Yastu vignanavan bhavatya manaskaha sada shuchihi न स तत्पद्माप्नोति sasaram chadhigacchati. But he whose intellect has no discrimination and whose mind is not under control and who is always unclean does not reach that goal and falls into samsara. Suppose there is one who is without a discriminative intellect, without a disciplined mind, and ever impure. He does not attain that goal. He attains samsara also. What will happen to the seeker if the vehicle is not in a fit condition? He does not know where he stands spiritually and what sadhana is relevant and appropriate for him now. Therefore, he is confused. A sharp intellect is required to understand the nature of the mind. He has a weak intellect and therefore his mind is unruly. Amanaskaha. He becomes impure because his sense organs move about an adharmic field. Therefore, that responsibility falls upon the individual. He needs to control his sense organs with his mind. This is possible only when he develops an informed intellect through education. Such a person may stagnate or worse, he may even spiritually fall. He would then have to swim upstream to recover. As per Shankara's commentary, one who does not know and who has not the mind under control and who is therefore always unclean does not attain that immortal great goal by reason of having such a driver. It is not alone that he does not attain that, but he reaches samsara marked by births and deaths. Thank you.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So as Triveni ji just told, what happens to a person whose intellect is not clean, is not controlled, and who is not very clean in his thoughts and all, their journey is away from the goal. Now we are talking about the positive person. What happens to the one who actually has these things? So that is being talked about in this verse. Yastu vijnanvan bhavati samanaskas sada shuchihi satu tat padam apnoti yasmad bhuyo na jayate. We saw that the other person whose intellect was not clean, was not controlled, he was going through so many births and deaths. This person who has a discriminative intellect, who has a disciplined mind, who is ever pure, he doesn't get to go through all that rebirths and redeaths and all. So in the next slide, we see that one who has these things, discriminative intellect, controlled mind, he attains the goal. And then once that goal is achieved, the Paramapadam is achieved, is never born. Now, what does this person do to get these discriminative intellect and controlled mind? He does his everyday tasks, his Nitya Naimitya Karma through Dharma. Earlier, he is doing for the goals of Artha and Kama, but in accordance with Dharma. And slowly, once he is more and more mature, then his desires change from Artha and Kama to Moksha desire. But all this is happening in the realm of Dharma. Now, once he does that, he slowly is getting in control his sense organs. In our Ratha Kalpana, we saw that those horses are the senses. Imagine a chariot in which the senses, the horses, are uncontrollable. Do we think that that chariot will ever reach its goal? You never know where it will go actually. And it may not go anywhere if all the horses are pulling in so many different directions. It's all chaos. So for this person who has a discriminative intellect, he has control over those horses through those reins, which is the mind. And once that happens, slowly he withdraws from the entire world. And once that withdrawal happens, he never strays from the right path. Once you are on the right path, sooner or later, you are going to reach the destination. So for the person who has this discriminative intellect, controlled mind, who is ever pure in his thoughts, in his deeds, he attains the goal and is never reborn, is what is talked in this verse. In the next verse, the Ratha Kalpana is kind of concluded, and it's a similar thought which is being expressed here. Vijnana sarathir yastu manah pragrahavan naraha Soadhvanav paramapnoti yad Vishnov paramam padam. Now we are saying that this person who has this charioteer, as Sir had mentioned, that the very important person in the whole Ratha Kalpana is the charioteer. Even though the traveler is that Jivatma, but this charioteer, the intellect, who is it really oriented towards? Is it oriented towards the sense organs and sense objects? Then it is a different situation altogether. Ideally, the charioteer should be oriented towards the traveler. Once that happens, for that person, the manaha is pragrahava. It's very controlled mind. For that person, he finds the paramapnoti. In the next slide, we see that this chariot will ultimately go to the checkered flag, which is the supreme nature of Brahman. Right now, also we are Brahman only, but we are aware of the lower nature of the Brahman. But once this higher intellect, this higher nature of Brahman is known, then our all efforts are going towards that, and then we become that, we realize that. Now, teacher says, how does this really happen? Because our mind is always going into so many different directions because of Desha, Kala, or Vastu. How does it happen in the Kala? That we are mostly stuck in our past. Oh, we had done that. Our past memories are there. I was there, this, that. So all the time we are discussing either our past or we are worried about our future. So that way the mind goes away here and there in Kala. Similarly, in the Desh, I was there, I had done that, this, that, so many things are happening in Desh also. In Vastu, I want that, this thing is so nice. So all these in Desha Kala Vastu, the mind is always engrossed in. But if I retreat back, if I focus it back towards that consciousness, Atman, then it becomes very much controlled. Another sadhana that Swamiji tells is that most of the times we are just talking to ourselves. The sadhana he tells is talk to yourself without using the words. Have thoughts without making the use of any words. It is not possible. But once we do that, once we stop talking to ourselves, we slowly retreat from the outer world and then we start establishing in the inner world. So that is how we can take control of our senses through our mind and ultimately get oriented towards the consciousness. And that is the Paramam Padam, that is the Vishnu Padam, that is the higher nature. And this higher nature is not really a travel in time or space. It's basically a husband or a son or a father realizing that I am actually a man, or the woman realizing that I am not really the daughter or the mother or the wife, I'm actually a woman. Once that transition happens, this is not really happening in space or time, it's just a realization. Once that happens, because all the problems happen to the husband or the son or the father, not to the man. So once you move from that realization to that you being a man or a woman instead of those relative relationships, then you attain that paramam padam of me, of the higher nature of the Vishnu, whatever we want to call it, and then those problems are resolved. This is what is being discussed, and in the next few verses we'll again see what sadhanas are there. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Indriyebhyah parahyarthyarthaah arthebhyascha param manah manasastu para buddhihi buddhiratma mahan parah. In this verse, Lord Yama is entering the topic of jnana. He has completed the Ratha Kalpana or the Ratha Drishtanta in the previous verses. But using the same principles which have been elaborated in Ratha Kalpana, in this verse, there is a shift from sadhana, which is a means to the goal, to sadhya, the actual goal itself. The Upanishad gives a progressive elaboration describing the sequence or the movement of self-enquiry or spiritual journey, and this is done in this verse in an intellectual manner. Next slide, please. This sequence from sadhana, the discipline or the means, is a movement from the sadhana towards sadhya, the ultimate goal. And it can be seen as a movement from the sthula, that is to the subtle and the very, very subtle sukshma. It is actually a movement from the gross to the subtle. Then it can also be viewed as a sequence describing the movement from the Saguna world to the Nirguna Chaitanyam. Therefore, this is a sequence which is actually describing the effects and moving towards the cause. So you can see this same sequence can be seen in a number of described in a number of different points of view. Next slide, please. So Lord Yama enunciates this sequence in this following manner. The sense organs are inferior to the sense objects. The sense objects are inferior to the mind. The mind is inferior to the intellect. And above all, everything is inferior to the Mahan Atma or Mahat, the total intellect. So this you can describe actually like a telescope, like one sequence goes into the other, each lower stage merges into the next more superior and more subtle stage. Actually, in this sequence, we can see Lord Yama starts by saying, Arthaha, sense objects are superior to sense organs. Indriyebhya parahyarthaha. Now, this looks like a bit of a contradiction because how can worldly sense objects be superior to the sense organs? The commentary of Bhagavan Shankara says that in this particular verse, Arthaha, sense objects does not refer to the worldly objects at all, but to the perceptions of these sense objects which we hold in our minds. Therefore, the perceptions of these sense objects are more subtle to the sense organs since they have entered the mind through the sense organs. So this is the first part of this sequence. So Lord Yama continues the next part of the sequence. Manaha param arthebhyaha. The mind is superior or more subtle than the sense objects. It can be described as more subtle, the mind, because it is the cause, the upadana karanam of the thoughts. This is where the thoughts arise, exist, and resolve. Hence, the spiritual journey consists of withdrawing the identification from the perceptions of sense objects and then identifying with the mind. The next stage of this inward journey is the intellect, manasastu para buddhihi. The intellect is more powerful and more subtle than the mind because the intellect has the function of determination, nischaya. All emotional problems of the mind can be conquered by knowledge in the intellect. In the Ratha Kalpana example, the intellect is the controller of the mind. Therefore, it is superior and more subtle. So the next stage is to disidentify with the mind and identify with the intellect. The final stage of this sequence is Mahan Atma, which is superior and more subtle to the intellect. Now, Mahan Atma is not the final stage of Atma, the original consciousness. That will come in the next verse. but it refers to the total cosmic intellect, which is also called the Hiranyagarbha. Buddhiratma Mahan Paraha. Hiranyagarbha is the total intellect, Samashti Buddhi, and it is more subtle and superior to mere Buddhi because it pervades the intellect, the individual intellect, like the ocean pervades the wave. It is the first born manifestation from the unmanifest and therefore shows the causal change. In fact, it goes back to cosmology. How did the universe begin? So one must learn to identify with the total intellect and understand that the individual buddhi intellect is only part of the total intellect, the samashti buddhi. This sequence can also be a movement explaining the Panchakosha Viveka. The gross body, Annamaya Kosha, is inferior to the energy body, the Pranamaya Kosha, which in turn is inferior to the Manomaya Kosha, the mind. And Manomaya Kosha, the mind, is inferior and resolves into the Vijnanamaya Kosha or the intellect. And the Vijnanamaya Kosha resolves into the Anandamaya Kosha or the Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic intellect. Bhagavan Krishna has explained this also in verse 42 of chapter 3 in the same sequence. Indriyani paranyahur indriyebhyah param manaha manasastu para buddhir yo buddhe paratastu saha. Thank you. Hari Om.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Mantra 11 goes like this. Mahatah param avyaktam avyaktat purusha paraha purusha na param kinchit sa kashta sa paragatihi. Tatparya, beyond the great, that's Mahat, is the unmanifested avyaktam. Beyond the avyaktam is the Purusha. Beyond the Purusha, there's nothing. That's the end and the highest goal. Next slide, sir. Mahatattvam is the total intellect. Superior to the total intellect is avyaktam. Avyaktam is that stage in which the intellect is resolved, all the knowledge is resolved, all the divisions have gone to the potential condition. What is that state? It is called Karana Avastha, the seed condition of creation. During the pralayam or dissolution, even the total intellect will resolve into unmanifest condition where all forms of knowledge go to the seed condition. You can imagine it as pralaya avastha, where the world is in the seed form and is called Karana Prapancha. The intellect belongs to Sukshma Prapancha and Avyaktam corresponds to Karana Prapancha, and Karana Prapancha, remember, is subtler than even Sukshma Prapancha. Next slide, sir. Now, suppose you want to know what will be the condition when the whole world goes to the seed state. We daily experience that. The state in which the mind is resolved, emotions are resolved, intellect is resolved. Not only intellect, but all the knowledge in the intellect will get resolved in the deep sleep state. In deep sleep state, our knowledge and emotions are not absent, but they are in seed form, potential form. That's the subtlest form of the creation. When it is the subtlest form, you will not be able to differentiate one knowledge from another. Just as in a seed, you cannot differentiate the roots, branches, etc. But we know that all these are present in the seed. That is called the avyakta avastha or nirvikalpaka avastha. When I sleep, my emotions are in nirvikalpaka avastha. During pralayam, the whole creation is in nirvikalpaka avastha. That is the subtlest form of matter. So, mahataha param avyaktam. Avyaktam means undifferentiated. What next slide, sir? What is our personality in sleep? During sleep, we are very much there, else we would not go to sleep. We happily go to sleep only because we are very sure we are existing in sleep. But what is our personality? Sukshmatama, the subtlest personality. Then, is this Atma? No. Then what is Atma? Avyaktat Purushaha Paraha. The blank state of sleep is not void because the next day, from the so-called void alone, everything is emanating, emerging, and therefore, what you experience as blankness is not shunyam. The blank state is the subtlest form of anatma. It is called Karana Shariram, Karana Prapancha, or Anandamaya Kosha, Jagat Bijam, Avyaktam, Maya, Prakriti. These are all synonyms for the subtlest form of matter. And superior to that blankness is Purushaha, the consciousness principle, which is witnessing that blank state. That there is a blank state in sleep is known to us because after waking up, I clearly say that I slept like a log of wood. I did not experience anything, which is equal to saying I experienced the absence of all experiences. That means the blankness is, it comes during Sushupti and the blankness goes during Jagrata Avastha. I, the witness consciousness, am permanently there. When the matter goes to blankness, I'm there. And again, thoughts emerge, I'm there. So, presence of thoughts, I'm witness. Resolution of thoughts, I'm witness. I have to turn my attention to the consciousness, which is inherent in the blankness as the very witness of that blankness. Next slide, sir. Let's take an example of a theater. The hall is full during the show. Once the show is over, all the people go away. I say that the hall is empty. Now I ask the question, how do you know the hall is empty? You have to say the light which illumined the presence of people in the hall, the very same light is inherent in the hall, illumining the emptiness of the hall also. Therefore, what you call as empty hall is really not empty hall, but the hall pervaded by the light which illumines the emptiness. If the light is absent, you cannot talk about emptiness. If people enter the hall, light is. People go away from the hall, light is. Similarly, thoughts arise, consciousness is. Thoughts depart, consciousness is. And you don't require a proof because if consciousness is absent, you will not be aware of the blankness of the mind. Therefore, turn your attention to the consciousness. How do you turn your attention to consciousness? By owning up the consciousness as I am. Owning is equal to claiming I am Chaitanya Swarupa Asmi. That is said here, Avyaktat Purushaha Paraha. So superior to that Avyakta Karana Prapancha is equal to Purushaha Chaitanyam. Why is consciousness called Purushaha? The word Purushaha has got two derivatives. Puru means body, Pushaha means indweller. So Purushaha means the resident of the body. Just as the light is residing within the hall, similarly, the Chaitanyam is residing Pure Shete iti Purushaha. The second derivation is Purayati Sarvam iti Purushaha, that which pervades everything, just as the light pervades the entire hall. The consciousness pervades the entire universe, illumining the matter, and therefore it is called Purushaha. The pervading consciousness, it is within and without. Antarbahi cha tat sarvam vyapya narayana stitaha. And Purushan na param kinchit. After arriving at the consciousness, there's no further journey. There's nothing subtler than Atma, nothing more interior than Atma, nothing more pervasive than Atma. The inner journey should culminate in the Chaitanyam, Sa Kashta, that is the culmination, the end of inward journey. Kashta literally means the pinnacle, the highest limit of the inward journey. And Sa Paragatihi, that is considered to be the ultimate destination or goal. All the others are intermediary stations only. And therefore, each stage is an intermediary station. Arriving at the Atma is the destination. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Harihi Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Let us chant the 13th verse. Esha sarveshu bhuteshu gudhotmana prakashate drishyate tvagraya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshibhihi. Gudhaha, being hidden, sarva bhuteshu, in all beings, eshaha atma, this atma, na prakashate, is not evident. Tu, however, drishyate, it is seen, sukshma darshibihi, by the people of subtle vision, agraya sukshma buddhya, with a sharp and subtle intellect. Next slide, sir. In the previous verses, we learnt about going from the gross to the subtle. In the Panchakoshas, the gross body, the Annamaya Kosha, we easily understand. The pranamaya kosha, that is a breath or the energy flow, is a little more abstract. Manomaya is the mind. The kosha is now no more physical. What all does it include? Emotions, feelings, and everything that happens in our mind, which is not a physical entity. Then comes the Vijnanamaya, even more abstract, the intellect. The mind is where our thoughts are, like a cloud. The intellect is more subtle, where decisions are made. Then finally comes the most subtle Anandamaya Kosha, where there is supposed to be pure bliss, Ananda, where there is no mind, no body, and no world. Just the experience of Ananda. And beyond this highly desirable state lies the Atma. So we can understand how deep and profound the Atma is. Sir always tells us that the Atma is immanent and transcendental. Immanent means it's so intrinsic and so close, closer than our very breath, which is the fourth outer layer. So we can just imagine how much more closer the Atma is. It is also transcendental, that is, it pervades everything and yet is not affected by anything. Next slide, sir. Acknowledging the Atma's supreme position and difficulty in understanding it, Lord Yama describes the qualifications for Panchakosha Viveka in this verse. To recognize the Atma, a highly subtle, mature, and sensitive mind is required. Just like to do any highly specialized field like microneurosurgery, one requires extensive training to appreciate the depths of the subject. This is true for any field, such as someone recognizing the absence of Shruti in music. The mind that is not trained will not recognize it. So also with consciousness. It is present in everybody and everything, but it is hidden in Anatma, intermingled and inseparable from the Panchakoshas. The word Gudaha literally means covered. However, one should remember that the all-pervading consciousness cannot be covered by anything, so it should be understood as though covered. One is preoccupied with the koshas all the time, so he misses the presence of the Atma. For example, the movie screen covers the screen, making it invisible, although it is always plainly visible. It is the substratum on which the movie is played. The Atma is not evident to the extroverted person whose mind is concentrated on the outer layers. We have the light and hand example to prove this. For the cross mind, the presence of light is not evident to him. If he turns his attention from the hand to the light, that is, making his mind a little subtle, he will discern the presence of light. To discern the ever-present light, one needs a very, very subtle mind. Next slide, sir. Turning the attention to consciousness is equivalent to owning up. Just like Vasumati madam said, that I am not the thought, I am the awareness through which the thoughts are made aware. I am not the body, I am the awareness because of which the body is sentient. Therefore, Yamadharmaraja says Atma is seen by the seer with a very sharp and subtle intellect that can discriminate the consciousness from thought. With a sharp intellect, one can distinguish one object from another, such as the light and hand. Similarly, he can differentiate intellectually between thoughts and consciousness as objects. But to separate the subject, consciousness, from the object, one requires a subtle intellect and extensive training. The ones without the subtle intellect will treat consciousness as an object and look for it during meditation. But we cannot find it because the searcher is the searched. That which you're looking for is you. Tat Tvam Asi. This understanding reveals the Atma, that Aham Brahmasmi. Thank you, Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Panaga, for a very nice conclusion of all the 7 mantras that we studied in this class, and about 5 mantras that were recapped by Dr. Anupama, which we studied in the previous class. In the next class, we will be completing the first chapter of Kathopanishad. We have not planned it in the initial planning, but the first chapter of the Kathopanishad is very, very significant. And looking back, I wish we had taken a gap to be able to look back at the entire first chapter of Kathopanishad before we start the second chapter. As we have a little time, just be with me for just a few minutes to recap this very wonderful first chapter of the Kathopanishad. You will remember the story. The story is a very unusual discussion with the god of death, whom we normally are afraid of. But here we are seeing Yamadharmaraja, none other than a Brahma Vidya Acharya. Those of us who are in the spiritual path know the highest ever respect and regards we have is for a Brahma Vidya Acharya. And the Acharya is none other than the person whom we normally are afraid of, that moment, that date of death that we would like to really avoid. And we have this little boy, Nachiketa, who should be our role model. In fact, Nachiketa is an embodiment of all the qualifications a person requires in a spiritual journey. Although many things are not directly said, through the discussion between Yamadharmaraja and Nachiketa and the kind of choices that he makes. Now, the choices are basically, he had 3 boons. The most important boon here is the third boon, where the student asks, I want Brahma Vidya. I want to know my true nature. What really happens after death? Is there something permanent that remains when this body drops? For which Yamadharmaraja wanted to teach him, but he wanted to know if the student had the qualification. So all the qualifications were very nicely brought out in the whole discussion. Most important for all of us is, do I have that tivra mukshutvam? That means I want it. I want it at any cost because now I value that as the most important thing in my spiritual destination. We just finished the Ratha Kalpana, and the Ratha Kalpana is, I want to clearly know what is this Atma, which again Panaga highlighted as immanent and transcendental. I want to know about my true nature, which is very close to me, closer than this very body, which is actually me. That is the understanding of what is this Atma, which is immanent. Transcendental means I am in this world, but I am not affected by the world because I'm like an illuminator of the world, just like the sun illumines the world. And whatever happens to this world, the illuminator is not affected. That is the meaning of transcendental. Slowly and slowly, we are going into the second chapter. In the second chapter, Yamadharmaraja goes directly to the point. And to the point by point, Yamadharmaraja is going to bring out the answer about what is this Atma. But towards the end of the first chapter, he's trying to tell us the instrument with which you understand Kathopanishad. Do I have that qualification? Just like, again, Panaga mentioned, if you wanted to do fine microneurosurgery, the instruments that we have as neurosurgeons, one of the most precious instruments that we have are the instruments for microneurosurgery. And generally, a good surgeon, after the operation, will take these instruments, wash them himself, put it into a container for sterilization so that they are not damaged in the process of cleaning, because these instruments are so important, they are so expensive, they are so delicate. Now, do I have that kind of an instrument in my mind to be able to make that subtle discernment? That is why we've already studied in today's class, the Panchakosha Viveka. I'm not this body, Mano Buddhi Hankara Chittani Naham. And what am I? Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. Why I stopped to explain this is, I want you now, because in just 1 week, we will be finishing the first chapter of the Kathopanishad. Take a little break to look at what are those important verses, particularly about the 3 boons and how Nachiketa very nicely words it as Anyatra Dharma, Anyatra Adharmat. What is that something beyond dharma, dharma? What is that something beyond the 3 periods of time? So I want to know that. And how did Yamadharmaraja come to the point, na jayate mriyate va anoraniya, smaller than the smallest? He gave immediately a certain glimpse, but then he goes back to various preparatory qualifications. And that is why when we go into the second chapter, the focus initially will be, are you ready for it? And then Yamadharmaraja gives the actual teaching. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Radha, please.
Thank you, Hegde sir, and all speakers of the day for a wonderful session. Thank you all, friends, for your active participation in this divine journey. On coming Monday, that is 5th February 2024, let us tune in for Gift 12 session. Now, it's time to conclude the session with Shanti Mantra. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.